Hi, remote 7th graders. It's Miss Settles, obviously. I'm back to read Freak the Mighty, Chapter 2. So in our first chapter, we met Max and Kevin. Max is a big guy. He's like 6'5"-ish. He lives with his grandparents. His dad is not a great person. We don't know what he's done yet. And his mom is dead. Kevin, aka Freak, moves in down the street, and they kind of knew each other from like younger grades, but like never really talked. And they just kind of like know who each other are and know that each other are like very different, and kind of weirdos. So now we're on chapter 2. This is page 5. This is called Up from the Down Under. That summer, let's see, I'm still living in the basement, my own private down under, in the little room Grim built for me down there, glued up. This cheap paneling, right? It sort of buckles away from the concrete cellar walls, a regular ripple effect. But do I complain about the crummy paneling or the rug that smells like low tide? I do not. So he lives in his grandparents' basement. So they made him like his own little room in the basement. Because I like it in the down under. He calls it the down under. Got the place all to myself and no fear of Graham sticking her head in the door and saying, "Maxwell, dear, what are you doing?" Not that I ever do much of anything. Grim has it fixed in his head that I'm at a dangerous age and they need to keep me under observation, like I may make bombs or start a fire, or whack out the local pets with my trusty slingshot or whatever, except I never had a slingshot. It was Grim who had one when he was my age. So his grandfather thinks he's like not a great kid. His grandmother thinks he is a good kid, but his grandfather's like kind of scared of him and thinks that he's like a bad person. The proof is right there in the family photo album. You can see this blurry little miniature Grim with no front teeth, grinning at the camera and yanking back on this prehistoric slingshot. Good for whacking mastodons, probably. Just proper targets, Grim says, closing up the photo album. End of discussion. Like, oops, better hide the evidence. Don't want the dangerous boy getting any ideas. Not that I have any ideas. My brain is vacant, okay? I'm just this critter hiding out in the basement, drooling in my comic books or whatever. All right, I never actually drool, but you get the picture. Anyhow, this is the first day of July, already counting down for the 4th and wondering where can I get an M80, which is supposed to have the explosive power of a quarter stick of dynamite or something. And when it goes off, your heart thuds to a stop for a microsecond. Wham! Which is probably what Grim is afraid of. Eek, eek, Maxwell armed with dynamite. So finally I get bored in the down under and I'm hanging out in the so-called backyard, your basic chunk of chain link heaven. So he gets bored in his room. It's kind of near the 4th of July. So he's out in the backyard. Grim keeps this crummy little mower in the shed, but what's the point of mowing dirt, right? Okay, I'm out there messing around, and that's when I see this moving van. Not your mainstream nationwide brand name mover either, just some cheapo local outfit. These big bearded dudes in their sweaty undershirts lugging stuff into the duplex half that's been vacant since last Christmas when the dope fiend who lived there finally got busted. So he's out in his yard, and he's just kind of like hanging out. And he sees these moving guys moving into the duplex next door. A duplex is like a house that's split in half. So Max has one side of it with his grandparents, and the other side is vacant because a drug addict used to live there, and he got kicked out. He got in trouble and got kicked out. So now Freak and his mom are moving in next door to them. So now we're on the top of 7. At first I'm thinking the dope fiend is back, he's out of jail or whatever, and he's moving his stuff back in. Then I see the Fair Gwen. Not that I knew her name, that was a little while later. At first she's a glimpse. Caught her going between the van and the front door, talking to the beards. I'm thinking, hey, I know her. And then I'm thinking, no way, butthead. No way you'd know a female that beautiful. So Freak, or Kevin, his mom, is like really pretty. So, and they call her the Fair Gwen. Her name's Guinevere. Because she looks like some kind of movie star, wearing those old jeans and a baggy t-shirt, and her long hair is tied back, and she's probably sweating, but she still looks like a movie star. Like she has this glow, a secret spotlight that follows her around and makes her eyes light up. And I'm thinking, well, this improves the old neighborhood. You're thinking, yeah, right, the goon is barely out of 7th grade. Who does he think he is? All I'm saying, the Fair Gwen had star quality, and even a total moron can see it. And the reason she looked familiar is I must have seen her bringing Freak to daycare way back in the dark ages, because the next thing I notice is this crippled up yellow midget kid strutting around the sidewalk giving orders to the beards. So he is in his yard and he sees next door that the Fair Gwen, Freak's mother, and Freak are moving in. And Freak is like ordering around people in the yard. I just also want to mention that this book has some not so nice words. Like the word cripple is like a pretty offensive word for someone with a disability. We'll talk about that later in our unit. Also, the word midget, which they just said, is no longer acceptable. Now it's little person. So we'll talk about that later in the unit because we're going to study some disabilities, and that's kind of what our unit is about. It's about differences. So just keep in mind this book is a little older, so it has some language that is not acceptable anymore. So he's in his backyard and he's looking around. He's watching this mother and son, Freak and Gwen, move in next door. And little Freak is like bossing around the movers. We're on the bottom of 7. He's going, hey, you doofus. Yeah, you with the hairy face. Take it easy with that box. That box contains a computer. You know what a computer is? I can't believe it. By then, I'm sneaking along the street to see what's going on, and there's this weird-looking little dude. He's got a normal-sized head, but the rest of him is shorter than a yardstick and kind of twisted in a way that means he can't stand up straight and makes his chest puff out. And he's waving his crutches around and yelling up at the movers. Hey, Gwen, one of the beards says, can't you give this kid a pill or something? He's driving us nuts. So he's yelling at the movers, telling them to be careful with his computer. And the movers are like, Gwen, can you make your kid stop? So Gwen comes out of the house and pushes the hair out of her big brown eyes. And she goes, Kevin, go play in the backyard, okay? But my computer. Your computer is fine. Leave the men alone. They'll be done soon and then we can have lunch. By this time, I'm hunkering along in front of the place, trying to maintain a casual attitude. Except, like I said, my feet are going wild that year, and I keep tripping over everything. Cracks in the sidewalk, ants on the sidewalk, shadows, anything. Then the little strange dude jerks himself around and he catches sight of me and he lifts a crutch and points it up at my heart and he goes, identify yourself, Earthling. So now Kevin is in the backyard and so is Max, and they kind of meet for the first time. And Freak lifts up one of his crutches and points it at him like a gun and says, identify yourself, Earthling. I'm busy keeping my feet from tripping and don't get it that he means me. I said identify yourself, Earthling, or suffer the consequences. I'm like, what? But before I can decide whether or not to tell him my name or which name, because by now I recognize him as the weird little robot kid from daycare and maybe he remembers me as Kicker. Anyhow, before I can say a word, he pulls the trigger on that crutch and makes a weapon noise and then goes, then die, Earthling, die. I motor out of there without saying a word because I'm pretty sure he really means it. The way he points that crutch is the only part of it. You have to see the look in his eyes. Man, that little dude really hates me. He wants me to die. So that was chapter 2. So they meet for the first time. Max goes out and we learn that he lives in the basement in the down under. He goes out in the backyard and he watches Kevin and his mom Gwen move in. Kevin's like yelling at the movers, telling them to be careful with his computer. And then he goes into the backyard because his mom yells at him. And Kevin points his crutch at Max and says, identify yourself. And Max gets freaked out because he doesn't know if he should identify himself as Max or Kicker or like what. He just thinks it's really weird. And then Kevin pretends to shoot him. And Max runs away because he's like, man, this kid hates me. All right, so that is chapter 2. They've just met. Not a great first impression. But we will see what happens next in chapter 3. Thanks for listening and following along. And I hope y'all had a great day. Bye.